Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the publication of the forms of ID that will be permitted in order to vote in future elections in the UK. Not to put too fine a point on it, the Tories aren't even pretending that this is about security anymore, as millions of people, part of demographics who don't traditionally vote Conservative, are excluded. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So this has been described as voter suppression, way worse than anything you'll find in the US. According to the Byline Times, I'll link their article below. I mean, I don't know about that personally. It is pretty blatant. Let's go through this bit by bit in order for me to try and tackle the points that people have raised with this issue in the past. So the first thing to note is that ID has not been needed to vote in the UK. There's zero evidence that voter fraud takes place in anything like a significant number of cases. For example, there are usually over 30 million people vote in a general election, and the number of fraud cases reported at the last election was 164. That's reported, not proven. Only 4 of them were proven. So let's not pretend this is about the security of the ballot. So then people from other countries will point out that they use ID for voting and that it's all perfectly normal. Sure, absolutely. But those countries have a national ID. We don't. In fact, on the day of the list of this acceptable IDs being published, which I'll get to in a moment, Tory MPs were arguing against the idea of having ID. Yesterday in Parliament, several Tory MPs, because Labour are starting to talk about it a bit more, several Tory MPs saying it's outrageous that we should have to have ID. You just voted to make us need ID to vote. Kit Malthouse, he said it's only a short step from having ID to having a barcode tattooed on you at birth. Can some of our Dutch viewers explain to me, do you get barcodes tattooed on you at birth? So what the Tories have basically done here is they've said, you must present ID in order to vote. So the people ask, OK, can we have some ID then? No, outrageous. Outrageous. We don't believe in ID. That's what the Nazis wanted. So next, on to what is acceptable. Well, first of all, the obvious passport or driving licence. Well, these are expensive and most people have no need of them. In fact, younger people living in areas like cities where public transport's good, but using your own vehicle is crap, these people are much less likely to have a driving licence because it's expensive and unnecessary. Even for people for whom it's not a particular expense. Because remember, you don't get a driving licence, even a provisional driving licence, just to vote. You get one to learn to drive. So you've got all the cost of the lessons and everything. I know people who are pretty well off and don't have a driving licence because they don't need one. But also passports, same reason. I mean, I don't have a passport. I haven't had a passport since my mid-20s. I can afford one. It's a hell of a lot of hassle to get one, and I don't need one. And the same goes for poorer voters. Remember, there are millions of people in the UK right now who cannot afford food. Can't afford to eat every day. Please don't be ignorant enough to suggest that they somehow find the money for these forms of ID because you think it's not very expensive. For you, it's not very expensive. For me, it wouldn't be very expensive. For people who can't afford to eat every day, it is. It's out of their reach. And what are you asking them to do? Try and save up this money, which they can't anyway. It's too much for them. Just so that they can vote to put someone in the House of Commons where they can earn nearly treble the median income and still enjoy heavily subsidised meals in the restaurants and bars. Now, this was about voter suppression, always was. Whatever the valid arguments are about using ID for voting, they don't apply in the UK because the government hasn't joined the dots. If you want ID to prove that voters are who they say they are, you have to give the voter the ID to do so. But not only with the Tories not doing that, but they even argue against people having ID in Parliament. So then what about the elderly? So you'll think, well, hang on, they vote for the Tories. Isn't this self-defeating? I mean, there'll be many elderly people who are poor and won't need or be able to afford a driving licence or passport. Yes, coming to that. You will be permitted to use some other forms of ID if you don't have a driving licence or passport. First, a disabled person's bus pass. This is the only one that actually covers a group who don't traditionally vote Tory. Second, an older person's bus pass. Oh yeah. Third, an Oyster 60 plus card. Oh yeah. Fourth, a Freedom Pass. This is for people of 66 years or over. There are a few others for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but they are also mostly, not all, but mostly for elderly people as well. Basically, if you're not entitled to, say, a disabled person's bus pass, and you've got neither the use nor the spare cash for a driver's licence or passport, you can't turn up to a voting booth at the next election, in England at least, and exercise your right to vote. You can't. And don't tell me, there aren't forms of ID for other people just as secure as a pissing Oyster card for the elderly. It was always known that the Tories would try and provide loopholes for the elderly, their main voting base. This is really blatant. Now, there are two more aspects to this I'd like to discuss. The first is that there is supposed to be a scheme for local councils to provide ID. So you may be going, oh, Phil, there's the council scheme. Yeah, good. That is leaving it to local councils to administer the process and probably deal with the costs as well. With council budgets squeezed, they're hardly likely to make the process easy or efficient, and the government are not going to give them the money to do that because the government don't want people to get these IDs. I can imagine people having to queue up for goodness knows how long, only to be told, oh, you don't quite have the right documentation. I have everything I was asked for. Yeah, but, you seem to have creased, that corner of that page. It's not quite right. Go and get another one. So you have to go home, repeat the process another day. And councils can be oppressively bureaucratic. Like, I remember when I was unemployed. This is not so much about the council, but the equally useless DWP. But I needed to get housing benefit. It took me 8 months. Not a word of a lie, 8 months. Every time they asked for some documentation, I supplied it on the same day. Obviously, I'm not going to mess about. I didn't want to be evicted. Fortunately, my landlord was very understanding. But I acted immediately. For 8 months, they'd ask for something. I gave it to them. All went into room 101 for a bit. Then they'd come back and say, oh, can you now provide this? 8 months of it. It's like, why didn't you ask for that in the first place? Why didn't you give me the list of everything you wanted to start with? Now, call me cynical. I'm not imagining that a council-run ID scheme, which they will not be keen to facilitate because they've got enough problems, I don't think that's going to go smoothly. Working parents may not be able to manage the impenetrable bureaucracy because when are they going to get the time? And at the very least, it'll require some considerable effort, even for those who can do this. And even if it is genuinely free, and I bet it isn't, I'll bet there's some cost associated with it. Even if it's like for the photo, which you'll just think, oh, that's just a photo. Yeah, it's still £5 that people who can't afford to eat every day can't afford. So it still puts off those, even if it is genuinely free, which I bet it isn't, who will happily go to the polling booth on election day, but may not relish the prospect of having to work at it, especially if they've gone along, queued up, been told it's not quite right, and they'll just think, So it skews the voter base to those most committed to politics. No, that's not a good thing. Because those most committed to politics tend to be extremists. And that'll be reflected in what's elected. Also, we know from pilots that when people turn up to vote but they've forgotten to bring their ID, many don't just go home, get it and go back. So many of those who even have the ID may still not get to vote if they don't tend to carry it around with them. The bottom line is, if the Tory government wants people to have photo ID to vote, and they don't for the elderly, mind you, but in general they do, they should ensure that everyone has photo ID. It's both or neither. We all need a national insurance number to be able to work, and the government makes sure that we all have one as soon as we turn 16. We don't have to fill forms in for it. The state makes sure we have that. Same should apply here. If we are required to have something by the state in order to engage in society, the state should bloody well provide it. But my final thought, so once we've moved past the democratic outrage, is that it may not actually help the Tories. Does it help them? I can only think about this empirically. I don't have data. But I think, well, yeah, they've done what they can to stop elderly voters falling foul of this. But surely there's still a risk. Don't be patronising, but you do get a bit forgetful as you get older. Elderly voters have voted many, many times, for decades. The process is ingrained on their brains. You have a lovely walk to the polling station, you pat a few dogs on the head, then you walk inside to request your ballot, you give them your name and your address, you get your form. That process is changing. And surely many will just forget. They'll just trot along and go, oh, can I see your ID? Go, what? Oh, we need ID. Oh, forgot it. You know, if the ID is not one that they habitually carry around, it may well stop some voting at all. Also, this scheme will hit poorly paid manual workers quite hard, I imagine. These are the votes that the Tories won over with Brexit. Labour, on the other hand, have increased their share of the vote amongst the educated, skilled and office workers, those who are much more likely to have a driving licence. And the thing about a driving licence, it's also quite common to carry that around with you if you have it. You imagine a poor manual worker, and let's say they go off to the polling station, but they've been at work all day, then they've needed the tea. They go out, it's in the evening. They get along, have you got your ID? What? Even if they knew about it and they sort of forgot, oh, no. Even if they ended up getting the council one, or if they have a passport, but you don't carry your passport around all the time, you think, oh no, it's at home. But you've gone in the evening. It's now, you know, quite late on. You can't be asked to go back home or get back in, or you may not have time. So, you know, even if you forget about the need for the ID, or you never knew because the government don't publicise it properly, you know, you've got voters who will have a driving licence because you usually, I don't speak for everyone, but I think most people probably do carry it around with them. Even if you forgot, you get there, go, oh, driving license. Oh yeah, I've got my driving licence. Even if you didn't deliberately take it for that purpose. But other forms of ID, maybe bus pass you carry around with you, but some of the others, particularly this council ID thing, which you don't need for anything else other than to vote, like once every few years. And then you think about those younger voters in the cities. Now, it's a disgrace for the personal rights of those people who will fall through this, and there'll be a lot of them. But young people tend not to vote in large numbers. And Labour tend to win their city constituencies by a fairly large margin. So I just wonder if this attempt by the Tories to do what they can to win power with fewer and fewer votes, because that's what this is about. You know, it's trying to win power with even fewer and fewer votes. I just wonder if it might backfire a lot. Or maybe they're calculating that they can fire up their supporters to put in the extra effort. They'll have the newspapers behind them and all the rest of it. And the more principled but less pragmatic anti-Tory voters won't bother. We will see, I suppose. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.